Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Wrap. I'm your host, Lorimer, today joined by Makone Maja. Let's get into the first news story of today, which is the ongoing national debate around the national health insurance, which the president signed into law last week, Wednesday. Facing a significant amount of backlash, not just from opposition parties, but also from many businesses who appear to have been under the impression that the national health insurance was for some reason not going to be implemented, despite the fact that government has been promising it for 10 years and has been taking active steps to implement it for at least the last two. The president now seems to be trying to sort of give the impression that something is still open for negotiation here. Ramaphosa said that national health insurance will be reviewed and revamped until it's perfect. He did, however, say, quote, "We cannot stop the progress of health coverage history because this one has a problem with that and that one has a problem with that." At the same time, there sort of seems to be a bit of general skepticism from the population. There's already kind of popular memes and things circulating on social media making fun of what the healthcare system might look like under national health insurance. And today, during the 702 election town hall, a number of Soweto residents suggested that while they're not necessarily opposed to the NHI in principle, they're a little bit skeptical that the ANC will be able to pull it off and that money won't be stolen. In response to this, the ANC's spokesperson at that event said, "If you look at the fiscus on an annual basis, you can tell that the ANC can be trusted. There are a number of things that we've been able to do," at which point some people in the crowd booed him. So, Makone, let me go to you with this one and just kind of start off by saying, do you think that the public has woken up now to the dangers of the national health insurance built up of our healthcare system? It does seem that way to me to some degree. However, it also is a little bit late, isn't it? Or do you think that Ramaphosa is correct when he says that it can be refined and revisited?
I want to add also a very well-deserved boo to the ANC spokesperson. But Nick, I do think that I'm more convinced that people have always been aware of the potential dangers of the NHI than that they're just now awakening to them. I think what's happened is that, the media wasn't doing enough coverage, providing enough coverage or discussion within the media about the NHI so that people are constantly reminded of it. Not nearly as much as recently when it was passed. I'm deeply concerned, I want to add, about the president's remarks. It sounds to me like an admission of the fact that bills are being passed, bills that are half-baked are being passed with the hope that they will be developed. And as you know, the most prominent way of developing bills once they've already been passed is through the courts, right? Is something happens, somebody takes that issue to court, and then you have 5 to 6 years of litigation. And then the 7th year, if you're lucky, a result is an outcome is determined, which is a very expensive process. But it could have been avoided because analysts, people in the medical profession have long been saying that the bill in its current form is unworkable. But that is an admission for me coming from the president, this acknowledgement that it still needs to be reworked to get to the level where people can stomach it for those that can. I'm very displeased with those comments from the president. But I also want to say that some of those concerns for me from the community about the looting of the NHI pool of funds are also, for me, an indicator that people are dissatisfied with models like BEE as well as the NHI, right? Sort of any opportunity that provides government officials with the ability to steal funds from the public, and certainly BEE is one of them. The NHI is just another to add to the list. But people need to also now reconcile the fact that those systems cannot work, that they cannot be improved, that BE cannot be improved, that the NHI as well cannot be improved, because deep in their foundation is the structure that permits it or allows it or creates opportunities for it to steal. And so that's certainly the premise of the NHI, is to redistribute income away from the people who are covered to the people, to everyone, to enlarge the tent to to everyone. So again, a very well-deserved boo, a boo for the person who was speaking on behalf of the ANC, but certainly one for the NHI in its entirety.
Yeah, I think it is quite interesting that, I think pretty much most South Africans, if you ask them, and this is confirmed by polling, which shows that sort of 80% of South Africans seem to think that the country is going in the wrong direction, can see the very obvious problem here, which is that even if they don't know necessarily some of the other problems with the NHI bill, the idea that there's going to be suddenly this huge pooling of money directly under government control that is open to looting, and the response from the ANC is something along the lines of "No, trust us, bro." This is not a particularly strong argument, and I think at the time, the more and more South Africans are going to come to the realization that NHI is not going to improve healthcare outcomes for the poor or the wealthy or anyone. That rather, it's just going to be another opportunity for bureaucrats and politicians to loot the system. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, and this is a warning in a report by the South African Reserve Bank, which is concerned about the prospect of carbon taxes being levied by some of South Africa's major export partners, particularly in Europe. So the South African Reserve Bank says that if the European Union implements its full-on tariffs on sort of carbon-heavy products by the year 2050, that this could reach 10% of South Africa's exports and hit around 9%, cause a 9% reduction in the GDP of South Africa under a worst-case scenario. They do, however, provide alternative scenarios which suggest that the impact would be far less. But this is, I suspect, kind of being used as a reason to move South Africa away from things like coal power. I suspect this is part of that ongoing discussion. But Makone, what do you make of this? I mean, on one hand, I can see the EU implementing something like this. We're talking about a date quite far in the future, right? 2050. And I can see, there's going to be a lot of changes in the world, technology, industry, all that kind of stuff before then. This does kind of sound like the sort of thing the EU would do, but at the same time, I can also see the EU providing some sort of massive exemption because there is a lot of kind of favor trading and politics in the way that the EU makes policy. What do you think of the story?
That's if African leaders and presidents negotiate those exemptions. I don't have confidence in them, Nick, their ability to do that. But I think this is an element of carbon colonialism, where these European countries and Western countries, American countries, will outsource their carbon emissions to African countries and then tax those countries, right? Because you have a lot of the digging of minerals that are then sent to those countries to be processed. But the digging as well of those minerals happens here. It happens in countries like Congo, right? Where cobalt is removed from the ground and stuffed into every one of these renewable products or cell phones that are mostly consumed in
Right.
those
The battery
countries.
systems.
Exactly. And I generally detest global governments like the EU for Europe. But I especially hate it when they extend it so that they now affect us as a country and our autonomy, our ability to decide what we want for a country, including up to and including the use of energy. So I'm not very happy with that. But I do hope that there will be exemptions provided to countries like South Africa, developing countries who have really done very little to contribute to so-called climate change, and that exemption will allow us to continue to rely on energy sources that work, that are reliable, and that will allow us to develop at a rapid rate.
So this reminds me of the EU's laws on trophy hunting. They've increasingly pushing towards stricter and stricter bans on any kind of trophy hunting passing through the EU. And this is mostly seems to be targeted at wealthy people within the EU who are sort of out of favor with the zeitgeist. But then the net effect of it is that some of the poorest people across Africa, in South Africa and Limpopo, in parts of Kenya and such, who might make their living off of the kind of tourism that trophy hunting brings, are suddenly disadvantaged. for no particularly good reason, because the evidence that kind of stuff is actually harmful to the environment is not very strong. So that's kind of, in a sense, a blueprint for exactly the sort of I don't know what to call it, but kind of sort of thoughtlessly malevolent policy that some of these developed countries sometimes inflict on the developing world. Anyway, let's discuss our last topic for today, which is kind of where the state of the election is. So the best polling, and some of the only polling around the country today, there's some stuff coming up from, I think, Mark data, which is, as far as I understand, quite good, although I haven't looked at it myself yet. But some of the most readily available polling at the moment is the tracking poll being done by the Social Research Foundation, which is looking at the performance of South Africa's big political parties day to day. So do go check that out. You can go and see it for yourself on their website. And it shows that over the past couple of weeks, the ANC has managed to improve its position in one of the turnout models that the Social Research Foundation had. Starting on the 15th of April, the ANC was in sort of the high 30s, and it's now somewhere in the mid to high 40s. And this is kind of leading to a sort of general perception in the public, amongst the analyst community, amongst sort of business analysts, that sort of thing, that the ANC might actually be able to, if not quite get 50% of the vote, get close enough that they'll be able to form a coalition with smaller parties rather than having to rely on the EFF or MK. Now, I think people are perhaps overreading the data. The fact is, although I think the SRF poll is really good and high quality, there just isn't that much polling in South Africa right now. When you compare us, for example, to the American elections, they have masses and masses of polls all the time, so that if any poll makes a mistake or has a random sampling bug or anything that just sort of can go wrong with it, there's an average to sort of keep things more realistic. But further than that, I think there's this also kind of inability to really grasp what all of the parties have said on this. So analysts are talking a little bit about, oh, well, you see, obviously the ANC is just going to form a coalition with the IFP if it can. And that's a possibility. But it also just seems to ignore the fact that the IFP's leader has publicly said that he's not going to go into coalition with the ANC. Now, politicians lie sometimes, so we don't know for sure. But I think that there's sort of kind of a willingness to sort of just hope for status quo in the analyst community. I don't know, Makone, what do you think?
I agree. I think there's been a lot of ignoring of what political parties have said going into this election season. And I think ultimately these political parties will themselves be judged once the votes are cast and how they decide how to move onwards. But I do think that South African polls haven't yet generated a reputation for themselves in as much as the US ones have, and a lot of people generally have disdain for US polls, and it's no wonder after the 2016 election. So I think this is really going to be the first meaningful test, because you've seen polls like the SRF, which are polling on a daily basis, being able to really do something that hasn't been done in this country's history. So public sentiment being polled on a daily basis is not something that we have experienced. But I do think that in the end, political parties are going to make decisions that are best for political parties, and the less people put their trust in them, the better. The sooner people hope less for coalition that will be in their best interests, the more realistic I think they should they will find themselves. But yeah, I'm also looking forward to judging the polls themselves after the elections, because obviously they've been generating so much media around their results.
Yeah, it's going to be quite interesting. I do hope that in 2029 we have even more, and I hope that the Social Research Foundation poll actually kind of leads the way in a lot of ways into opening up that space and getting more business community people and analysts and such to invest in such things in the next election, because the more data we have, the more informed we can be about how elections are going to turn out. And I think it just gives ordinary people in the country a better sense of where their fellow South Africans are. This is one of the reasons why the Institute of Race Relations does polling all the time, to ask people's opinions on things, because it's important to know sometimes where the country is at. Otherwise, you just have sort of disconnected talking heads in newspapers and on YouTube, going on about things that actually aren't necessarily related to reality, which is why, we exactly like to base some of our opinions exactly on what people think and what the sort of zeitgeist is out there, not just in the paper, but actually amongst ordinary people. And polling is a very useful tool for that. It's not perfect, but does give one a sense. Anyway, we will very shortly see, as we are just over a week until the election is held. So I hope that everyone listening will be considering voting. And also please go to pledgetovote.co.za and sign up there to get all the info you need about voting. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I hope you found the show interesting. We'll see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Wrap. Cheers. The Daily Friend Show and the Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR. Or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.